All right, hello everyone. My name is Jon R, alcoholic.
Hey, John.
My sobriety date is October 30th, 2017. I have a sponsor of the sponsor. My sponsor knows he's my sponsor. I have a service sponsor as well. She knows she's my service sponsor. We might be taking inventory on the way home from this meeting as well to see if anything was untoward said. I will mostly be sharing my experience and my opinions. I mean, I'll share some of the quotes and some of the information about what Concept 10 is. But I tend to find that a lot of these concepts, traditions are best learned. Well, I find that in my own experience, I've best learned the traditions and concepts when I tend to stumble over them and do some stuff that's maybe wrong around them, and then learn and have that conversation with my sponsorship. And also just relating it to my personal experience. So concept 10, first of all, says every service responsibility should be matched by an equal service authority. The scope of such authority to be always well-defined, whether by tradition, by resolution, by specific job description, or by appropriate charters and bylaws. So like a lot of these concepts, it's a fairly wordy way to say, in my opinion, if you're asked to do something, if you're chosen to do something, if you're elected to do something in AA, you should be allowed to do that without a lot of micromanagement, you know? I was thinking on the way, or as I was thinking about this topic, one of those things I thought about is like a lot of times, at least in Mountain View or like Sunnyvale, San Jose area, which is where I go to meetings, we choose a secretary for the meeting. That person sets up the meeting, runs the meeting, also chooses speakers, right? I've never seen a meeting have a vote on who the speaker is for the next meeting, right? That is some of that like delegated authority we get. Could you imagine if that would happen in AA? If every week the secretary was like, I have these speakers, let's vote on them, right? That would just be a nightmare, right? To do that. That would be like, why are we doing this? We've elected this person to do this. Can't they do it like with that? You know, that's that delegated authority, you know, that's like a good example. Again, some of that stuff that's happened to me is I've been in those meetings. Well, first of all, I'll pull a quote from Bill W. that is often talked about when this, he says, Bill W. says, it is perfectly clear that when delegated authority is operating well, it should not be constantly interfered with. Again, this talks a lot about like the elections that we have, you know, like when we have shows. I mean, it goes all the way up from our trustees that are delegated. They have the authority to run, you know, general service at a national level without, you know, we have the conference, the general service conference, who is everyone familiar with the general service conference process can operate? If you're all in a concept meeting, I'm guessing you have some knowledge. You know, we can't meet and vote like every week, every month on that kind of stuff. So we have our conference process where we kind of talk about with the fellowship, the ultimate authority in Alcoholics Anonymous, which at almost every level, the ultimate authority we have is the groups. So whether that's the secretary running a meeting has the responsibility and the authority that's delegated, but the ultimate authority in those situations goes back to the group at the top of that upside down triangle, you know. But we can't operate in a way where we kind of nitpick and micromanage in that way. In a lot of ways. I mean, that even happens at work. Like, how many people have talked about a micromanaging boss at work and been like, this is awful, just let me do my job, I'm qualified to do this, you know? It kind of goes back to, you know, we trust our higher power, we trust the people we put in these positions. And there is a way to like, you know, audit them, so to speak. I mean, we've all seen, I'm sure in our time, have seen service commitments or people holding service commitments kind of drop the ball on those, you know? I know, in my district, a couple of years ago, there's a story that was told of we had a treasurer that went home with the money and never came back, you know. We didn't just let them keep their authority in that position, you know, the delegated authority. What we did is we kind of took care of it, you know. Ultimately, legal means were not pursued in that, more spiritual means in nature were pursued, but, you know, that person was also not allowed to continue in their role, you know. Because I think like the delegated authority is an important part. I can tell you from my own experience, I've run meetings where a well-meaning but maybe overzealous old timer would pull me aside after meetings and say, you know, you have to do this, you know, you have to do this, you know, you have to do this. You're not choosing the right chair people. This is a mixed meeting. You need to get these kind of people, this kind of people. And so me and a person who was co-chair or co-secretary in that meeting said, we don't have a business meeting at this meeting. Maybe that's what we actually need here, you know. And then when we formed a business meeting, that same guy was like, I don't understand why we need a business meeting. You know, we did, but you know, because we want like that level of trust has to be maintained too. Like we don't just get this authority and then run rampant and have resentments when people give us their opinion, you know, because there's like those might be valid, but there's like appropriate manners in which that's, you know, decided. I will say in some of the reading, it's funny that I just talked about the co-chair or the co-secretary because I'm personally not a fan of meetings that have co-secretaries. I don't know if you guys run that. I don't know if there's one here. I might be, you know, making a mess of things, but it's funny because that's brought up in the essays in concept 10, which I appreciate. And that is a condition to be avoided at all costs is double-headed business or policy management. Authority can never be divided into equal halves. Nowhere does such split authority or double-headed management so bedevil a structure as in its executive departments. The vital need of avoiding double-headed executive management will be fully disclosed under concept 11. Which again, it kind of goes, this whole, in my opinion, this whole concept goes again back to the trust that we put in our trusted servants. Like that is the term, trusted servants. You know, I think it's important that we allow those people to make the decisions. They're elected, as the tradition said, by a loving God as he expresses himself in our group conscience. You know, I believe very clearly that when a trusted servant is elected, it's because my higher power is speaking through that group. That's what I believe. I've had debates with people that says it may present in our group conscience. That's a, you know, a matter of opinion, but the other thing I think is important though about this concept is the part where it talks about, you know, this delegated authority is often clearly defined, right? One of the things I brought with me, so I currently serve as the DCMC of District 4, which is Santa Clara North. And I brought with me, as part of our guidelines, this minus one line, which I think we need. That's my job description for DCMC. It may seem like a lot, but it's clearly defined what my role entails. You know, if you guys want to look at that, you're more than welcome to. It's quite a long read, but mostly talks about roles, responsibilities, requirements for the job, that kind of stuff, but like also entails what the job actually is, which I think is important. One, because that can be kind of an issue when if we get someone in a service position, and we're just like, oh, it's fine, you just do this, you go to one meeting a month, that kind of stuff. Anyone who's been in general service knows that general service is not oh, you just go to one meeting a month and bring this stuff back, which I think is important because it says to have it clearly defined, whether it's through charter, through bylaws, through all this. Again, I don't have it. I'm not one of those memorizing books kind of guys, so you have to bear with me. There'll be quite a bit of paraphrasing. But like the clear definition is important. I can tell you, so my wife is also an alcoholic and she was greatly involved and she still is with PICPC in our district. And she was elected chair last panel. So in panel 73, she was the chair of the district PICPC committee. And they told her, all you have to do is run the meeting and go to the area meeting once a month. And she said, well, I can't go to the area meeting. I have a conflict. I'm still willing to do the chair. You just let me run the meeting. They said, yeah, great. It was one of those things where they just needed to fill a seat kind of thing. And then after the fact, a bunch of other stuff came up. You know, they're like, oh, you also need to go to the district meeting. You also need to go, because the way PICPC works is, in Santa Clara specifically, is a lot of our services are by the Santa Clara district. Just how it happens, general service is split into North County and South County. So like intergroup is one district, H&I is one district, general service is a split district. So they're like, oh, you have to go to both district meetings, you have to go to both of these kinds of stuff. And she was angry because they're like, you told me all I had to do was run the business meeting. And now you're asking me to do all this stuff. I can't do all this extra stuff. I signed up for the service commitment that you all presented. And the fact that I can't do this extra stuff is unfair. You know, I got to see that. I try not to advise my wife too much on AA stuff. We both have good sponsorship on either side. If she asks for my opinion, I give it, but often, you know, that she was able to handle that. But it was weird because I was the alternate DCMC at the time. So I had to see this. I had to see my DCMC say, why isn't this lady showing up? And I'd just sit there and be like, you know, But again, maybe the root cause of that would have been a a well thought out, well defined service role, which again is important that like we do that at all levels, even the coffee maker, right? There's a guy in my home group who has the nickname, everyone calls him Hazelnut, because it was not clearly defined what type of coffee he was and was not allowed to make at that meeting. So Mike has now been known as Hazelnut for about a year and a half. I didn't mind. There were some people that really minded. You mess with the coffee in an AA meeting, that's something I would not want to deal with. But again, it might seem silly, but like clear definition, these roles is very helpful. Like some of that might seem like that micromanagement I talked about earlier, but again, it's one thing to like micromanage where you're constantly reminding someone, constantly saying you need to do this, you need to do this after we've given them that well-defined delegated authority. But before that, like I knew what I was getting into with that role. You look through it. There's probably even some stuff that's not on there that I do still. Like that job description doesn't say anything about like my voting right, my right of decision. Some that's built in because it does say to understand the 12 steps, 12 traditions, 12 concepts. So I do know about my right of decision, my authority versus my responsibility in equal parts, my right of participation. But it's just like I love this stuff because I think of these concepts seem so unapproachable because they seem like this national organization level. Like, what do I have to do with trustees? What do I have to do with the board of AAWS? Or what do I have to do with the board of Grapevine? How does the trustees managing the executive office of GSO, like, how does that even make sense to me? But again, when we break it down to these like kind of similar concepts about like, what does a service role look like? Is it clearly defined? Are you saying, oh, you just show up and open the room and that kind of stuff? But you also have to hold the key. It's like some folks might, again, have issues with these service roles or be unable or able to do them based on some of these like nitpicky stuff. Like, I was actually listening to a podcast about this as like in preparation, and one of them it was just like one of those random AA podcasts, and the guy was talking about like when someone slips out to the bathroom and we elect him, say, oh, he'd make a good, let's just have them do it. Like, that kind of goes against our right of participation, like that kind of stuff. Like, and also someone, for someone to come and be like, oh, we've elected you secretary. It's like, all right, fine. What does that mean? It's like, oh, you have to, come every week. It's like, oh, I'm going on vacation for 3 weeks next week. That might have affected that, that ability to do it. I do it on time. Is that like?
Actually, I like 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is like, so there's been some like dicier, unfortunate situations I've gotten into. I'll speak of them broadly, because they happened recently within the past couple of years, but like, there's also like when we try and take authority away from other groups, right? That the example of like my wife and how she interacted with the district and saying, this is what my committee that has the authority here elected me for this reason. This is what they told me to do, right? And then we had people from our district. Again, this made it very complicated because it was my wife in the position, like all this kind of stuff. So it was a very interesting and long drawn out thing. But like, we had a lot of discussion about like, can our district tell the PICBC committee what they should be doing? Can we, like kind of strong arm them? It was brought up at one point that's like, oh, we fund them, we contribute money from the brought to the district and they're part of our budget, so we can withhold money from that, which is outlined in concept 10, that like that's one of those ways that we can utilize our ultimate authority by like, auditing. There's talks about censure of our board, which actually has been brought up multiple times recently. I think every conference the last 4 years we brought up censure of our board, even though those people that probably should be censured or would be ones that should like were involved in that are no longer on the board. But it's just like, so when does like a district get to say what another committee can do? So there was a lot of discussion about that. Ultimately, because part of it too, one of the discussions around that is I should say it was brought up in our district for a vote. Do we want to tell PICPC that they have to split and no longer be a district committee and they have to be a 4 and 40 committee? That was brought up. And so like, who has the ultimate responsibility in that was a good question, because it was only voted or was only discussed at District 4. District 40 was not brought in to that discussion. So like this is an issue affecting both districts. Like how do we kind of do that? And again, speak kind of generally, like and aside, I think I'll speak plainly, like I think the perspective obviously changed because my wife was involved in that committee. Like I will say that straight out that like that you know, like affected how I thought about the situation, how I approached the situation, and that kind of thing. Whether that was a good thing or a bad thing is up for debate. I try not to make a decision. All I know is that it happened. That's the way it worked out, you know. And it was just kind of one of those things where it's like, how do we do this in the right way? Is there a right way to do this? Is this the right thing to do? You know, like, are we taking away the authority, the delegated authority of a group? Like, are we the ones who should be making this decision? Is someone else the one who should be making this decision? Do we vote to have our own committee and not kind of vote to split one? Just say we're going to do our own one, and then the one that exists kind of de facto becomes the other committee kind of thing. So it's just like an interesting, you know, situation. I can tell you ultimately it was not voted to be done. I think maybe it was one of those things where I think maybe 3 people voted in favor and the rest voted against it. I don't know if that's the right decision. I can tell you, I mean, by the end of it, like a lot of things in general service, my perspective changed throughout the conversations we had through the discussion. So, you know, whether that was the right move or not, I think, you know, the question more is like, is this committee being of service to the people they need to be of service of? And group conscience decided that the way they were doing it was the way to do it. But again, it was one of those things where it's like, you know, whose decision is this? Who has the right to tell a committee what to do? Like, is this interfering, you know, like, again, it was, I've spoken broadly on it. It was kind of a messy situation ultimately, because it was like, you know, there was some stuff that seemed not spiritual in nature in terms of some of how that discussion was done. But these, again, like I said in the beginning, that like sometimes I've had to like trip and stumble over these experiences and then gain some hindsight after the fact, you know. This is not on concept 10, but I once was a secretary of a meeting and there was an Alan on the meeting and she got called on. And so she spoke at meeting level and someone after the meeting was like, that's a no. You don't do that. We're not letting just, I mean, she might have a good story, but we're not letting Joes off the street, like just speak at our meetings. This is not a, you know, so like, again, I've had to make some of these mistakes in Alcoholics Anonymous. Not saying necessarily everything's a mistake, but like, you know, I've had to go to sponsorship, to service sponsorship. I've been lucky that I have kind of a service council around me of like elder statesmen, you know, I don't know if you know Eric from panel 70, panel 73, panel 71. I don't remember. I think he's 73, right?
73.
Yeah, so Eric's he's from our district, and so he comes to our district meeting, and I talk to him fairly regularly. And another guy named Ross, that's a former area officer. He actually, came to find out later that he lost delegate twice out of the hat, which, you know, is kind of a, you know, he was like a chair and then alternate delegate, and then he lost twice out of the hat, which, you know, that's how it goes sometimes. But I have like these kind of service, I call them my service council, you know, because like I have my service sponsor and I talk to her a lot. In fact, and she has heard a lot, especially she knows very clearly about the stuff that was going on in some of those panels, you know, because I would come to her and be like, and we talk about it and we talk about like what, you know, how does that work out, that kind of stuff. But so yeah, I think like part of this is it's important to know these concepts, not just like about the specific concept that applies, because like concept 12, the I was like the
Warranties.
yeah, warranties, like, are we being personally punitive to people? Like, are we a perilous wealth, you know, place of wealth and power? Like that kind of, like all these kind of stuff comes in, like who has the right of decision on where they want their committee to go? Like if it's funded by the district, how much authority does the district have over that committee? Like that kind of, you know, so it's like, there's a lot of stuff that can happen. And like, we do this because these are principles that have worked for a long time, you know, that have guided our fellowship for a long time. And they apply. Like I can tell you almost all these things that apply to me, you know. And it's like, it's been a wonderful experience. I didn't give you much of my service history, but I became a GSR in panel 73 or 71 for half a year. I wasn't even supposed to be the GSR. Like another guy volunteered to be the GSR. Well, we had our GSR stepped down halfway through the panel, and another guy was like, "Oh, I'll be GSR," and then he didn't show up to the meeting for 4 weeks when we were going to elect him, and so I was like, "Well, I'll do it," and so I became GSR halfway through panel 71, and then vaulted up to alternate DCMC in my next panel because I was willing to make myself available and see what shook down, and you know, a couple people came up to me like, "Do you know what you signed up for?" And I was like, "It's in the guidelines, you know." But they're like, "But do you really?" And I found out. And then I've, you know, like I said, I've become DCMC, and like it's a very short time in general service, but it's been a very quick learning experience. It's taught me how to listen. Like you're talking to a guy that probably 5 years ago would have thought the plain language big book was a terrible idea, and that's not the way we do things in AA, and that's like the message. And now you're talking to a guy that says, that's not for me, but it's not intended for me. Like that's what I've learned, you know, through some of these things. Like I love the big book. I take the guys through the big book as it's written. I don't need the plain language big book. Someone coming in tomorrow might get sober because of the plain language exists, and it only gets sober because that plain language exists. And that's, you know, through listening, through opening my heart to the spiritual process that is general service, through learning this stuff and being willing to learn this stuff. I can tell you, me and Kathleen, how many times went through like the service manual 3 times in the first like 2 panels, I think. Yeah. Eventually we, at like the third time, I think we finally decided let's skip the charters and like, cause we don't need to read the old charter and the new charter again, but, I'm still learning. Like I still go back to like, you know, I've not been sober terribly long. It doesn't feel terribly long, but you know, I've gotten the opportunity to learn and to grow. And I think anyone that's interested in the concepts is probably doing them a service. So I appreciate you all being here. I'm glad I got to share with you today, and thanks for listening today. So thanks.
Thank you.